Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to the Meiji Guillotine Murders by Fūtarō Yamada, translated by Bryan Karetnyk. The corpse that cradled its own head. Chapter 5. The main gate was a modest affair, and the black wooden perimeter fence, which was hidden by a variety of trees and shrubs, was falling down in places. The building inside was not very large, but still, the grounds must have been around 1,000 sumo. It transpired that Yamashiroya had acquired the place, following the trend of wealthy men buying up villas in the area, but that his work had kept him so busy in Yokohama that he had scarcely had any time to make use of it. The neighboring plot was farmland, and it was the older farmer and his wife who usually looked after the villa. If ever somebody came to stay there, their daughter would cook meals and run errands for them. Her older brother, on the other hand, had been given a job in Yamashiroya's main office in Yokohama. The rear gate, or rather the side entrance, opened onto the farmer's fields. On the far side flowed the swollen Sumida River, with Mukojima perched on the opposite bank. When Kawaji arrived, he found Kazuki and the others in the field right outside the side gate, all of them congregating around the corpse. Besides Kazuki, there was Onimaru, the old farmer and his daughter, and one other man whom Kawaji recognized from a previous investigation. He must have been around 40 and looked very respectable. Both his head and his beard were shaved, with only a little stubble remaining, which was a rare sight in those days. It was Major Yuasa, the former assistant finance director in the Ministry of War. Only Kazuki and Yuasa had umbrellas, which they had taken from the villa. The girl was holding the umbrella for the latter, however, leaving him free to stand with his hand in his pocket. Kawaji was already aware that one of Yuasa's arms was missing from the elbow. So, this is where he's been hiding, Kawaji marveled. Rather than linger on Yuasa's face, however, he soon found that his eyes were drawn to the scene of devastation before him. What struck him most, though, was not the sight itself, so much as the foul stench that assailed his nose as he approached. While it was only the end of the second lunar month, the end of March by the Western calendar, the fields and forests lining the banks of the Sumida River were already a great blur of verdure. Verdure. V-E-R-D-U-R-E. Verdure. the greenness of growing vegetation. Verdure. Lining the banks of the Sumida River were already a great blur of verdure. Even in the cold mizzle, the air was filled with the fresh scent of spring. So what on earth was this terrible smell? Leaning against the wall with only a fundoshi to cover his modesty, the large corpse had been positioned on his knees, facing forward, cradling a gruesome-looking head with disheveled hair and no beard. The whole body was dripping with excrement. Beside him were scattered almost a dozen pails, their offensive contents seeping out into the soil over the field. Onimaru put him here so that we could get a better look at the head, Kazuki explained after a few brief introductions. Then he began to relate the preceding events. Earlier that day, Yuasa had gone out to feed the koi in the garden pond, which was near the side entrance. When he got there, he could smell the stench emanating from the other side of the wall, so he pushed the side gate open. Then, although the door had barely touched them, the pails that had been stacked there went toppling over. That was when he found the decapitated body beneath them, covered in their contents. He rushed to call the young servant girl and told her to run to the police station. Only Yuasa-san says he doesn't recognize the body, Kazuki added. I see, said Kawaji, turning once again to look at the corpse's face. The moment Yoko Makura told him about the body, Kawaji had imagined it must be Ihei Arisaka, Yamashiroya's chief clerk who had disappeared the previous month. It was just a hunch, for other than the fact that the body had been found at Yamashiroya's villa, he had no evidence. But it was not Arisaka, though the body somewhat resembled his. Arisaka had served under Yamashiroya in the volunteer militia, and he was also a large man. However, the corpse's face wasn't his. Since launching the surveillance operation, Kawaji had become familiar not only with the faces of all Yamashiroya's close associates, but also with those of certain army types. And not one of them had such a ferocious-looking, vile physiognomy. Physiognomy. The art of discovering temperament and character from outward appearance. External aspect. The facial features held to show qualities of mind or character by their configuration or expression. Physiognomy. And not one of them had such a ferocious-looking, vile physiognomy. Each of them had at least had the appearance of a higher class of a criminal. The body was recently deceased. The rain had not let up, so they could not be certain how much blood there had been. But in any case, the body could not have been more than a day old. How long has the body been here? Kawaji asked. Well, that's just it. The old man said that he left the pails here yesterday, intending to move them to a nearby slurry pit today. But because of the rain, he just left them where they were. So not before yesterday, in any case, Kazuki explained. The old man looked so pale that he might collapse any minute. So, we're left with the hours between yesterday evening and today, said Kawaji, turning to the two Razotsu. Didn't you see anything when you were on duty? Not a thing, sir, said Onimaru, scratching his head. You see, there's quite a bit of distance between the front gate and the road, and there are trees blocking the view. Still, it's odd that you couldn't hear any voices or sounds, said Kazuki. He must have been killed elsewhere and brought here. Are there any footprints? It's too hard to tell after all this rain. Why would they bring a body all the way out here into the middle of the fields? It's too far if they just wanted to dump it. Especially somebody as big as him. You'd need more than one man for that job. This looks more like an act of intimidation or retaliation to me, probably directed at the people in this villa. I agree, said Yuasa. If you ask me, this is Yatoru Aoki's doing. As your investigators for the Imperial Prosecuting Office, you'll know just what a scoundrel he is. He came here the day before last, threatening me with false accusations. So I promptly showed him the door. He flew off in a rage. I wonder whether this isn't his way of getting back at me. He could have had some help from his henchmen. But if this were retaliation, wouldn't it be odd to kill somebody you've no connection to and then dump his body here? Said Kawaji. So, it's intimidation then? Maybe. A few moments later, looking as though he had just remembered something, Yuasa said, Yes, I thought it was odd myself. But if it wasn't Aoki, and I've given this a lot of consideration, I really don't know who it could be. Then again, I was responsible for the execution of more than a dozen rebels after the Boshin War, although it was really my men who saw to most of that. I did lose my right arm for it though. Look, they ambushed me in the street one night in the autumn of the first year of Meiji. There were several of them. To this day, I don't know who they were, but they could still be after me. And not only me, but my men as well. Maybe this poor fellow was one of my men. But sir, wouldn't you remember if he were one? Asked Kawaji. I doubt it. Why, it was chaos back then. There were times when I even had men from Satsuma and Tosa under my command. The more I think about it though, the more likely it seems. But, in truth, I cannot remember the man. Why do you suppose he's wearing only a fundoshi? Fundoshi is a traditional Japanese loincloth, originally a common undergarment for men and women made from a length of cotton. Fundoshi. Why do you suppose he's wearing only a fundoshi? Why, to get rid of the evidence from his clothing, surely. But if it's so that the man cannot be identified, how will we even know what it's all about? Asked Kawaji. Damned if I know. The corpse is every bit as much a mystery to me as it is to you. Surely you don't suspect me, said Yuasa, fixing Kawaji with his gaze. Then, with open hostility, he added, You're from Satsuma, aren't you? Are you suspicious of every man from Choshu? He laughed. Even if you are, you can see perfectly well that I have no right arm and I cannot wield a sword in my left with such brilliance. I do not know what he was like before he died, but even now I can tell he was the sort of man to put up a fight. Kawaji crouched down and lifted up the corpse's head to take a look at it. Brilliant was the word, horrifying in its skill. It was a near perfect cut. There did not appear to be any other wounds. This was indeed a strange corpse. If you believe you're under suspicion, there are a couple of questions I could ask that would clear your name, Kawaji replaced the head and stood up again. I believe that the deputy assistant to the Minister of War paid you a visit today, but I hear that he left almost as soon as he arrived. What, may I ask, was his visit in aid of? Though he didn't know what questions Kazuki had already asked, he wanted to hear this answer with his own ears. Yuasa glanced at the girl. That is of no concern to the Imperial Prosecuting Office, he replied with open hostility. Isn't it, sir? It certainly is not. His Excellency heard a rumor that I was here and came to verify it for himself. He thought I'd returned to Chōshū. When he saw me, he was glad to see that I was in good health, and that was about it. He's a very busy man, you know. He made his excuses and left, just like that. Kawaji looked at Yuasa searchingly. You left your position at the Ministry of War. What was the reason for that, sir? And why did you come here, when you had your family return to Chōshū? You're very well informed, Chief Inspector, said Yuasa with a smile. I resigned from the ministry because I was worn out by all the work that's come my way ever since the Restoration. However, I know that there have been some strange rumors going about and that the Imperial Prosecuting Office has been poking its nose in lately. Given the Imperial Prosecuting Office regards my resignation as suspicious, that casts doubt on both my own honor and that of the military. I suspected there might come a time when I'd have to vindicate myself. So I decided to stay here a while, renting this villa from Yamashiroya while I recuperate. Suddenly, he flew into a rage. But this is not my vindication! I don't have to explain myself to the likes of you! He seemed to be angry not only at Kawaji, but also at himself. In any case, what does all that have to do with this body? Now, clear off, the lot of you! And if you want to talk to me again, you'll have to come back with some evidence that this corpse has the first thing to do with me! Having said his piece, he turned and went back in via the side gate. The rest of them just stood there, silently, in the rain. Shh, which by now had grown heavier. Suddenly, the head that the corpse had been cradling tumbled down from its grasp, and the girl let out a dreadful scream. Chapter 6. Kazuki and Kawaji walked back in silence through the blistering early spring rain, while the two Razotsu were left behind to take the body to the local police station. Kazuki had his umbrella, but Kawaji was soaked to the bone. The inclement weather was the last thing on their minds, however. When the shadow of the Senzoji Temple's 5-story pagoda drew into view beneath the twilight sky, Kawaji finally broke their silence. Do you understand any of it, Kazuki? No, he said, shaking his head. One thing we can be sure of, though, is that that body had to be connected to Yuasa somehow. That and the fact that Yamagata and Yuasa are connected as well. But as for what links that body to Yamagata, I've no idea. More than that, I just can't see what this case is all about, said Kawaji. Why was the body naked? Is there any significance in the fact that it had been beheaded and was cradling its own head? And what about all those pails? Come off it, Kawaji. I don't know what the nakedness or the beheading mean any more than you do. But the business with those pails was just an accident, surely. And the fact that it was holding its own head was because I ordered Onimaru to sit it upright. Yes, I know all that, but I can't help thinking it all has some meaning. How could something like this have happened in the first place? I just don't understand it. As he walked, he stroked his beard. You know, I've had this strange, nagging feeling all of this time, and I just can't seem to put my finger on it. Something's bothering me. Well, I can't very well help you with that. Anyway, let us start with the fact that we still don't know whose body it is. Or should we cut to the chase and just bring Yuasa in? No, let's wait, Kawaji said, shaking his head. He had already overstepped the mark, accusing Yamashiroya's chief clerk of culpability. Culpability, responsibility for wrongdoing or failure, the quality or state of being culpable. Synonyms include blame, fault, guilt, onus, and rap. Culpability. Accusing Yamashiroya's chief clerk of culpability. We don't have enough evidence for that yet. If we mess this up, we'll have the army to answer to, given Yamagata's involvement. Let's bide our time. As they were entering Asukusa, Kawaji suddenly gasped. What is it? I've just put my finger on it, cried Kawaji. That man! Mightn't he be one of the condemned criminals from the prison? Kazuki stopped dead in his tracks. The corpse, holding its head. It was positioned the same way. Couldn't the body be one of the ones you beheaded with the guillotine this morning? Have you lost your mind? Said Kazuki in a hushed voice. Didn't I just tell you that it was Onimaru who put him in that position? You think it was one of the men we executed this morning? Did you see the heads of those men? No, I don't know. Then what makes you say such an extraordinary thing? Ever since the incident with Tatsuo Kumoi's head, security at the jail has been tightened up. How could anybody get a body out of there? Not a body, just the head. Just the head? Kazuki's eyes were wide with astonishment. Even if somebody could get a head out, who would do such a thing? Him. Him who? It was Yuasa's face. It wasn't the first time I saw him, but when he was standing there by the pails. I'm only just remembering it now. He reminded me of somebody else. It was him. Who? Whose face? This afternoon, when I arrived at the prison, I saw the man who comes to collect the pails. He was coming out the gate at the back. He was wearing a rain hat and a straw coat. He looked like a peasant and had a beard. But if you were to shave him, he'd look rather like Yuasa. For a brief second, Kazuki was lost for words. But what you're suggesting is absurd. A former high official responsible for the army's accounts turned into a gong farmer. For a start, Yuasa has only one arm. How could he do that job with only his left arm? That would be some pretty hard labor. He wouldn't have to do much of it. He'd just have to pretend that he was doing it for long enough to make it out of there with the head. Of course, he wouldn't even have to collect the pails himself. He could have had somebody else do it. The farmer next door, for instance. But then, it's such a risky business. In practical terms, he'd have no choice but to do it himself. He really is the spitting image, you know, only without the beard. He must have done it himself. There were about a dozen pails loaded onto the cart. I bet one of those pails contained one of the criminals' heads. The sentry would never think to check. You mean? Kazuki stared intently at Kawaji's profile. You know, I must have underestimated you, Kawaji. I always knew you were a man of talent, but I never imagined your mind could work like that. Is that a compliment or an insult? It's a compliment, although I'm still not convinced. Even if he could get the head, where would he get the body? The body is probably Ahe Arisaka's. He was the same build. What? Cried Kazuki. For a few good seconds, he couldn't find the words, but then finally, in a hoarse voice, he said, You mean he's put Arisaka's body together with one of the prisoners' heads? Yes, I believe so. But why? Why would Yuasa do such a thing? To cover up the murder of Arisaka. But why would Yuasa have murdered Arisaka? We'll only find out if we ask Yuasa himself. There are still a lot of things I don't understand. How Yuasa came to know about today's beheadings, for instance. And even if it was him collecting the pails, he couldn't just turn up unannounced. So how was he able to do it? Then, as he himself pointed out, he's only got one arm. So how did he manage to behead Arisaka? And what's become of Arisaka's head? Still, there are a lot more things that make sense if you think about it like that. Could Yamagata have turned back from the villa immediately because he found that Yuasa wasn't really there? Because at that time, wouldn't Yuasa have been hurrying the horse and cart on, all the way from Kondenmacho to Imado? The body had been stripped, of course, to remove any evidence that it was Arisaka, but it was no coincidence that it was covered in excrement. This was because even though he'd shaved the beard on the head, just as he had his own, no matter what he did, he couldn't get rid of the foul stench from its time in the pail, and so he had to cover up the discrepancy between the head and the pristine body. The lights of Asukasa, which by now had been lit, drifted past them. Seeming not even to notice them, Kazuki asked, But all this would mean that one of the coffins lying at the prison is missing a head, wouldn't it? I would presume so, yes. But the bodies are buried when they get to Kozukapara. A missing head would be noticed right away, surely. Everything will become clear when we see those coffins, Kawaji barked. And we'd better hurry up. It's almost time for the transport to Kozukapara. Chapter 7. The two of them arrived back at the jail. Immediately, Kazuki asked the sentry whether anybody had left that day carrying anything the size of a human head. The sentry shook his head adamantly. Kawaji then ran over to the mortuary. He had made it just in time. The bodies were ready to be taken to Kozukapara, and Ichinohata was busying himself securing the third of the 5 coffins with a straw rope. Sergeant! Kawaji cried. Wait! Cut those ropes! Ichinohata looked puzzled. You've been here ever since they brought the bodies in after the executions, haven't you? Of course, sir. And you didn't leave for a single minute? Well, sir, only to relieve myself. Was that before noon? If a head was missing, it would have to have been taken before Kawaji arrived, and Ichinohata asked him whether he wanted to look inside the coffins. I have some suspicions about the heads in those coffins, Kawaji bawled at him. Remove the lids! Flustered, Ichinohata cut the ropes, snip, snip, and lifted the lid of the first coffin. There, illuminated by a dim shaft of light, lay the prisoner, cowering as he held his disheveled, blood-spattered head in his lap. All right, next. The second lid was opened to reveal another corpse cradling its own grim-looking head. Next! The third one was opened. It was the same story. At this moment, there was a feverish sound just outside the mortuary, and it was getting closer. It was Kazuki's voice. Kawaji, quick, look at this! He went to the door. What is it? One of the guards just showed me this. The Emperor is displeased that Vice Minister Hirosawa's assassins still haven't been caught, so just this morning he issued an edict calling for the perpetrators to be apprehended. Take a look! Edict. A proclamation having the force of a law, a order or command. Edict. He issued an edict calling for the perpetrators to be apprehended. Take a look! Kazuki was clutching what appeared to be a copy of the edict. This must be the first time that something like this has ever been distributed. Even for the Imperial Prosecuting Office, this seems like an impossible task. What Kazuki said was right enough, but Kawaji immediately turned back to the coffins. Ichinohata opened the fourth one. The head was there. Finally, he opened the fifth one. Once again, the corpse was cradling its head. Each and every one of them had its own heinous, gruesome-looking head. Are any of them missing? Kazuki came in and surveyed the group of coffins with their open lids. They've all got them then. I thought as much. There's no way anybody could pull off anything as outrageous as stealing a head from here. That would be just too bizarre. Then, clutching Ichinohata by the arm, he said, I hear you were the one who dealt with the man who came to collect the pails today. It wasn't just today, sir, said Ichinohata, scratching his head. It's my duty to look after the prison pails. The job does have its perks, though. By this, he probably meant that he received an extra payment of a day-corn radish or some leafy vegetables. So, it was the usual man who came today? Asked Kawaji. No, sir. It was somebody else. The usual man was ill, so somebody else came in his place. There didn't seem to be anything suspicious, so I just let him get on with it. Did I do something wrong, sir? As he listened to the answer, Kawaji stood there, dumbfounded. His hypothesis, which had come in a flash of otherworldly inspiration, was crumbling all about him. The slovenly faces of a handful of prison servitors darted past. They'll be going to Kozu Kappara any minute now, sir, said Ichinohata, turning around. May I tie them up again? Kawaji nodded, feeling like a fool. Assisted by the servitors, Ichinohata once again set about securing the 5 coffins with a rope. Chapter 8. It was an evening at the very start of the 3rd lunar month, but already there was a warm southerly wind blowing in across the waters. Braziers were burning in the bank of the Sumida. With their backs to the river, the party looked out towards the woods and the forests of Imado. There, to the unexpected strains of ancient music, the sound of a beautiful woman's voice with a strange accent began to float across the air. Awariya, asobi hasutomo, musanu, asakurani, ihei arisaka no mitama, mairitamae. Sitting in a row as usual were the grandees of the Imperial Prosecuting Office. Old Manabe and his daughter, Chief Inspectors Kawaji and Kazuki, as well as the 5 Razotsu come musicians. Ima, Mairu, I am the spirit of Ihei Arisaka. For the first time since arriving in the land of the dead, I can see the land of the living without hindrance. Sitting up on the embankment were Yasutari Yuasa, the old farmer and his daughter, and Yataru Aoki. Earlier that evening, Aoki had been detained and forcibly brought there. As they dragged him off, he had kicked and screamed, "Hey! Where are you taking me? I may have been Aoki, the hardened criminal, a long time ago, but since the restoration, I haven't done anything to get arrested." But now, even Aoki was placidly gazing upon the scene from his spot on the ground. Yamashiroya has fled to France, whereas I was left behind. When I saw him off at the wharf, Arazotsu from the Imperial Prosecuting Office questioned me. If things continued like that, I, who was Yamashiroya's eyes and ears, would be arrested. And if I were arrested, I should not have the strength to feign ignorance about his dealings for long. So I fled. The golden-haired Miko spoke as though she were chanting. Now that I had come to the attention of the Imperial Prosecuting Office, the army was the only place to which I could turn for help. But the army had already sacked Yasutari Yuasa, who was hiding out at Yamashiroya's villa in Imado. I paid him a visit. As always, I entered via the back door. Yuasa looked on in disbelief, frozen, his eyes fixed on Esmeralda's beautiful, terrifying lips. But Yuasa said that when the time came, he and I should have to shoulder everything and die like men. I could not bring myself to do such a foolish thing, though I have a mother, a wife, and 3 children. I did not become Yamashiroya's chief clerk to suffer such torments. I begged Yuasa, but he refused out of hand. "It was you who threatened me!" Yuasa suddenly started shouting, losing control of himself. Then Yuasa carried out his plan to eliminate the dangerous witness that I was. "Of all the outrageous things!" Yuasa cried out. "Silence that malign spirit!" "The Imperial Prosecuting Office will hear its testimony," Kazuki rebuked him. Meanwhile, Aoki had come to blackmail Yuasa, and the Razotsu had started watching him. He had no choice but to act. But what could he do with the body after he'd killed me? He felt uneasy about burying me in the garden of a villa that he would eventually have to leave, and he worried that I could be discovered if he dumped me in the river. So Yuasa decided that he could get away with it if he could make the body unidentifiable, or at least make it appear that he had nothing to do with it. The strange, ethereal music of the spirit world continued to echo around. Yuasa happened to learn that the old farmer on the neighboring estate was the pail collector for the jail in Kondenmacho, and it was from him that he found out about the executions that were to be carried out that day. So, disguised as the old farmer, he staked everything on his plan to gain entry to the jail, steal the head, place it beside my dead body, and show it to the Razotsu. Kawaji's eyes opened wide. His guess had been spot on. And yet, the previous night, as I always did, I entered the villa through the back door, so that the Razotsu wouldn't see me. Yuasa killed me by lacing my sake with rat poison. Then he cut off my head. He placed my neck under a hay cutter and single-handedly brought the blade down.
Then he took my headless body and placed it outside the rear gate and threw the hay cutter into a nearby field latrine. The younger maid knew nothing about this because it was done at night. But if Yuasa's aim was to make Arikasa's body vanish, then where did his head end up? Kawaji wanted to cry out. He knew, however, that during these seances, Esmeralda could hear nothing from the real world. That day, Yuasa successfully managed to steal a head from the jail. The main gate was under strict guard, but the sentry for the mortuary was elsewhere, gossiping. With a mournful look on his face, Ichinohata was blowing his flute as though in a trance. While Yuasa was gone, Yamagata arrived. The young maid knew that he was out, but as he left, he had given her a look that told her to keep silent. The rest is as everybody knows. Yuasa tried to explain it away by saying that it was probably harassment from Aoki or an old settling of scores, and if that didn't wash, he knew he could always just say that he didn't recognize the corpse. The Kagura bell suddenly rang out. Cling, clang! The former assistant finance director just sat there, bolt upright. Together with Arisaka, Yuasa helped bury the army's secrets. The voice was beginning to fade away, the usual sign that the spirit's possession of the medium was about to end. Wait! Kawaji cried out. Once again, his guess had been spot on, and yet, tell us one more thing, I beg of you, he entreated the spirit. All the heads in the jail were there, but how can that be? The head. Though the spirit could not hear anything spoken in this world, the foreign Miko had just enough time to say these two words before falling silent, as though sinking into the ground. Then there was nothing, and the Miko's golden head slumped forward.